I'm going to open my introduction with a short poem by the painter Florine Steckheimer. The world is full of strangers. They are very strange. I'm never going to know them, which I find easy to arrange. I'm sure many of you know Laura Owens already, personally or through her work, but I will tell you a quick story about how I have come to know her. In 1995, when I was in art school, I made a bright Easter egg colored abstract painting with vertical stripes and a jutting triangular slice of pepperoni pizza as the formal device. A friend of mine asked me if I had seen the work of Laura Owens. This was the same year Brian Weitzman wrote a piece on her work in Art Forum. She was 25 and had just graduated from Cal Arts a year earlier. Now, I don't think Laura Owens ever made a painting with pizza, but the point is that seeing her work made pizza a viable option. And from this point, she became important to me as a symbol of all things that painting could be, or should be, but can't possibly, or wants to be but shouldn't, isn't allowed, or never will, or still is, and always has been. Collectivity and the fragmentary have long been associated with feminism as much as pluralism with postmodernism, and pastels with girls, and embroidery with housewives, monkeys with mischievous play, trees with life, staining with Frankenthaler, the grid with minimalism, numbers with mathematics, texture with depth, ferocity with Palermo, hands with touch, and clocks with time, and I could go on a lot longer, poking at all the references, influences, and words others have thrown at Owens' work till I realize that none of these are this or that. And somehow all of it as a whole, back and forth with a little more and a little less, bring to mind Laura Owens, or not her at all, this thing we call painting. Please join me in welcoming Laura Owens. Thanks for having me here. It's really nice to come down here. This image is of a diptych I did, the two paintings in the foreground. I think the way I'm going to just structure this is just by showing the newest work first. This work is that you're looking at is probably from 1998 and 97 in the background. So, yeah, the 90s. Not allowed to time about the 90s anymore. Okay, so hold on. Oh yeah, bear with. Yeah, and definitely. This will go a lot better if you guys ask questions. I don't know. Oh my god. I don't know. Okay, so all this work that I'm showing you now is actually up in a museum in Bonn, and it's I'm just going to go through a couple installation shots right now. There's 3 rooms, 2 of which are really kind of specific installations that I've worked on for the last year. These are about 82 of what I'm kind of calling these clock paintings. And I guess the way I've worked in the past is I've always tried to, with each new piece or new group of works, I've always tried to sort of re-ask the question, what is a painting, what can a painting be, and allowing either through collaboration or other friends or family or a photograph or a word or something, just sort of instigate the process of making the painting. So these are this one room just has 4 large paintings from the last 3 years. But in this center room, which I guess I'll go through now, are these clocks, and I'm going to show you a video because there's, I guess I'll just go through these while I talk about it. So in the past I've worked with things that I thought, well, that's the hardest painting to make, let's make a sunset painting. It's like this cliche that has no meaning, and can you make it this hard problem and try to see how you
reinvent or reinvest in the idea of also just using a word in order to start painting. Because I also had this theory for a long time that there's two kinds of artists. I don't know if I still believe this, but I think I do. That there's those who have a hard time starting and those who have a hard time finishing. And it kind of like says a lot about your practice. And I was definitely the hard time starting kind. And so I would use these little tricks, or not tricks, but like wordplay or some kind of something to hold on to in order to make the gesture move and make it go forward. So these, I guess I thought of in the simplest way possible, like a clock as a painting. So all of these are clock, like to me, all my works I'm titled, but these are clock paintings. So in any way that I could like run with this idea of face of a clock, hands of a clock, and then to sort of jump the shark fully was to have like the kinetic aspect where the piece of the part of the painting is actually moving. So this is just charcoal on a gesso canvas. And they're all 2 foot by 2 foot. So these have, that's a minute hand and an hour hand. And also, like, for a long time, I've always worked in a kind of traditional way of making either charcoal sort of maquette of the painting I'm about to make, or preliminary sketch and then a preliminary study. And the studies have been, fairly small and have like a much more improvisational and like either something as literal as like just trying to figure out which color is going to work on this particular material, or just like in the same way that Tiepolo is, not that I'm Tiepolo, but like he's going to do like this very quick sketch, this scale, that just to kind of get the idea. Or some instances it was actually, because I am starting over every time, it's this problematic where I'm teaching myself to paint the painting I want to paint. So I pre-paint it, sort of painting it like these, some of these ones that were just like stained ink into canvas. These are, some of these I haven't said are embroidered with a yarn, sort of a crewel embroidery, which it's a whole other thing that sort of happened in the late 90s where I got really invested in textiles and looking at textiles as painting and trying to switch them around. And I've done that a couple times with a few things with collage, where I try to use the paint to do what the other thing does, like sort of a stand-in. I did that when I was first starting out with sculpture, because I was making sculpture and installation art so this is embroidered at CalArts, and at some point I said, okay, I was making paintings that would hang within a sort of sculptural installation with kinetic sculpture and text on the wall, and the walls painted color. And at some point I said, okay, I'm just going to make the stretched canvas on the white wall, and everything I'm interested in terms of what an installation does when you walk between all these things, I'm going to do that with the painting. So I can this. I think I'm going to have a real problem if I can never do it backwards. Let me show you this now. So I'm showing you this because there's this moving, just to get a sense of how it's moving. Can you see? Clock. Some of them are moving, like some of them, like the one that's on white is not moving because it's an hour hand. These are the 4 walls. So I also had this idea of it being a frieze. So these are, I think there's a picture of some people here, so you can have a sense that it's above your head. And then in the middle of the room is this 30-foot long table. This is another project, sort of, I've been working on for the last 3 years, which are these handmade books, which I can show you. Does anybody have any questions?
Are they accurate? Do they keep time?
Oh my God, Esteban, you are not allowed to be here. That's the last not accurate. It's an
That's
abstract. There's no time involved. I mean, it's alluding to, it's alluding to this idea. It's it's as stupid as the idea of like, oh, the flag. It's like the painting as the object, and it's just that. How do you move towards the object, and how does the object move towards the painting? And then it just like sort of, it's like a generative thing. But anyways, when I started talking about like how my process works, I was trying to talk about these studies. So these, at some point, I had this show where I had like, it was sort of a survey, and this curator was like, she came to my studio and she saw these hundreds of these little paintings that are just these studies, and she showed them. And I think in the back of my mind, now that I see this and what I did, having seen that installation where I showed these studies, I kind of started thinking about these multiple panel sort of juxtaposing, separating up, because within the larger paintings, I'm also a lot of the time moving between like different ways of painting, different techniques, and different ways of talking about types of space or the way space gets made. And so here it's like separating them out in sort of discrete instances, and then the multiple panel sort of like accumulates. But it's also like the books in a way, because the books I'm making, it's like this process where the, unlike a drawing, it's like no one page or no one, not one of the text, or not one page of the text, or not one image is primary. It's like you get to, it's as much about flipping through and the sequence and the remembering of one before the other as it is any one thing. So it's like moving and seeing if like the painting can, it probably does it. I don't know, it's like a big question, like can you have a painting that's made of all things that some certain percentage could not stand on their own, or if they do, there's a big question mark. Or then there's some that, yeah, maybe they could be, maybe it is a discrete object. And so can you slide those together and see what happens? Did you get the idea, right? Okay. I'll show you now. It's easier. Okay, so I'm going to slide through these just so you get a sense of the color and the texture, and then I think I have to show you the video so that you understand the dimensions and how that works within the space. So this is 9 pieces that are 7 feet by 8 feet. No. Yeah. That is one piece, just like the clocks are in my mind one for and mutate, like in a different shaped room. I would need more, I would need less. It would be. This doesn't, you don't take out the panels or anything, but it does change within each where the site that it's going to be shown. So, yeah, this came out of like, in another way, the starting point was the fact that I was asked to redo a painting that had been destroyed. I redid this sort of background color, and because I couldn't remember how to do it from given like 7 years after the fact, how you make this sort of stain that has it's like a perfect gradient. Like I had to make about 9 attempts at it, and at the end of the day, a couple of them were like I left on a stretcher, and they were sitting around my studio forever. And just at some point pulled it out and started working on it. Made one of these, and then just said, "Oh no, it needs to be 5." And then from there, it was like I had those up, and then it needed to be 7, and then it turned into 9. And I think it could have kept going had my studio been bigger, but it was like kind of like that was it. So. And I think I can show you. hopefully you get a sense of it. So there's this, I don't know if I have a picture, but there's two white walls behind you. So I guess what I'm really, really interested in this painting is how it completely implies the rest of the room. And that there's this painting that's coming and being born out of, obviously, the raw canvas, which for me is like sort of the literalism of what, is actually happening. You are painting on the raw canvas. And then that implies another layer of how it's coming out and sitting on that white wall and being sort of born out of that. And how both of those types of spaces are also spaces, the white of the wall and the canvas, which I think is interesting. And then I guess for me, there's like a funny, not funny ha-ha, but just sort of a subtly funny thing about how do you have the blank canvas within a piece and not have it read this 100% irony. Like, I was like really happy that it's like this like little tiny, like a dripping of irony, but it's not, that's really truly not the dominating force. But then the best, I think as an artist, the best situation that happened to me with this piece was just realizing there's like all these dreams you have when you have a deadline or show where or at least where the truck has come and you're dreaming about these 8 blank canvases being put on the truck. And when I literally saw the guys come and do this, like they're working on this and then they go and they're like, and I'm like, yeah. And it was like, so they picked up the blank canvas and wrapped it. I was like, oh my God, I did it. I was like, oh. But it doesn't have that. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, the gesture's there, but it's like layered underneath. There's other reasons for it being there. And so,
So was that an after, like, that was one of the final works, the blank one?
Yeah. I mean, the raw canvas sort of came in early in the other parts to sort of, I don't know, I guess like looking at it now, it's sort of announcing the sort of space that is, because these paintings have this kind of incredibly deep, it's not atmospheric space, I guess it's sort of akin to perspectival space, but it is like a deep space. So like the canvas, because it also the other thing that you're not really seeing is just that because the way it's made, there's all these drips that are going down the sides of the canvas that sort of are kind of interesting and really draw your attention because it's like white, black, white, or white, blue, and it's like very vibrant. So I was noticing that when I'm looking at the piece, especially because you're going to be walking around the room, it's not just like this frontal experience, which is something I've been interested in a long time. It's just that canvas is announcing itself anyway. So like I felt I was compelled to like have it be talked about on the front of the canvas as well. So, and then again, like this is just like it totally goes back to a lot of things I've been thinking about, and I've been interested in space, So like it's really, really super simple ideas of like deep space and this middle ground and the oil paint and these gestures are like a extreme foreground, and making space and just I guess it's just sort of like I have a friend who's a composer and he's like he wrote some piece and I just remember him saying it was going to involve multiple choir members and almost a full string ensemble and percussion all of a sudden. And he's like, I'm going to have all these people here. And his music is fairly minimal at times and, a lot of vocal work. But he's like, you have to. Once you get all these players there has to be a moment where they all do it. It sort of made me think like, okay, yeah, you got all the players in the room. This is what music is. Like you do have, and as obviously someone where you're needing other people to be there, it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity to make sound happen. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is there are these things that paintings do, and like just like the orchestra that can play all at once, space is one of them. I kind of feel like compelled at times to be like, painting does this thing, like let's instead of ignore, you know what I mean, like shutting that off. And that's I think ultimately kind of why I'm always like starting over in some way, because I feel like like we get in these grooves with looking at paintings and thinking about them in certain ways because of historical moments and that, but I guess I'm just really interested in it as a whole I was telling someone earlier about this, like it's gonna sound, now I'm mixing metaphors, but you like the artists that inhabit the space of painting, the ones that are making it, the ones who have made it, like we all have parts to play there, and they're doing different things with it. And it's like you can't, even though you might be at war with this part over here and this idea, like I'm not the artist that wants to, if I destroy that, it's like in Hindu mythology. I know it will be reborn. It's not like I truly want to destroy it. Do you know what I mean? I think destruction is necessary, but I also think all the aspects of painting are necessary. And they're not even necessary, they just are. And then and to ignore it and to just be like, I mean, I'm fascinated by people who are like, I don't know if you know about this whole thing with the monochrome that happened in the 60s in New York, that there was sort of like a teleological end to modernism, and some people just got really into the monochrome, and like, they were like in a club, and like, I know friends who, they're abstract painters, but they had a brush stroke and they couldn't be in the club, it's like that, like you can get that, that's fascinating to me, but I feel like that is not, like I'm glad they exist, just like I'm glad there's other, people who have other kind of priorities existing, but I'm actually interested in the whole, and so I want to always be like, I start over, I go in the studio, now who knows? Even though it's ironic, I feel like it's really hard to get away from yourself, because you're a human and you're going to keep following, like this multiple panel thing, I don't really know how I kind of got on it, but and obviously there's something happening. How long does this lecture go? Is it
Up to,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Oh, questions?
That's his question.
Okay, lots of questions?
Did you paint all 9 at the same time, or did you do one?
I did
it's a
the
simple
one, I
question.
started one, and I got it probably maybe to like 80% of what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And then I kind of had the vision of what it was going to be with 5, and I put the 5 up, and then it was like, no, it needs to be 7, and then it needed to be 9. Like it kept going, but that was,
So then you completed it as a group.
yeah. I mean, I kept working on all 9 at once at the end. I mean, obviously, even the blank one, it was that was really funny. That was like the best thing. It was like, it was like every time I was like, I would put like a little collage element on it, and then they're like, oh my god, that is like it's so illustrative of what's happening there. Like you can't illustrate the blankness, you have to leave. It is blank, you can't illustrate it, so it was like, that was interesting to figure out. Yeah, so I could show you some of these books now, or should we do it? Okay. So some of the books, I have them all. I'm gonna have to go to this. So I'd say like some of the books, is it easier to play a couple at once, or should I full screen? Should I try a couple at once?
Yeah.
Okay. So the one on top is in the vein of, there's a couple modes that keep repeating. One is sort of like homage books, like I'm mostly women artists, like this one's for Marie Laurencin, and just taking a text about her, sort of making an object that's sort of inspired by my relationship with her work in some way. It's really no big idea, it's just like this object, for me, I guess, the experience of looking at once I'm finished is the same in some ways as same experience I have looking at a painting. Yeah, I kind of got on that with the books. I think I got there by having an experience with Book at the Library that way, and then realizing this experience is something I was interested in, so I went home and I just one-to-one sort of recreated this Cezanne book that's about this big. So page for page, like redrew the whole thing. And I guess I feel like it's sort of this way that a whole other, because they're pages that accumulate, there's this whole other level of no one thing is that precious that the accumulation itself becomes interesting. And then on top of that, of course, is like the accumulation of all the different books. So it's important for me that definitely wouldn't just show one. I think the least I've shown together to 15. So it's about the stacking and about the patina that happens when people are looking at them, so that they're all to be handled, and they're, that's part of it. The one at the bottom is like just some printing techniques that end up making their way into the painting. So it also circulates through other work that I'm making. Like there was one book that I made, I don't know if it's here. Here's one, like it can be really simple, like this, the gala, the Doug Aiken gala, they made these posters of, I don't know, they just like call people and were like, oh, Doug Aiken wants to take a piece of your art and turn it into this poster for the gala. And I was like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then of course you get the stack of 50 posters, and I was like, so just taking that and turning that into a book, because it's like, why do I need 50 posters of this thing? So, but then it becomes like this useful thing to me, I guess. And all the books, myself and Edgar and this other person who's helping me, Jamie, we all sort of like, well, at first I just did it myself in Long Island with the first couple books, but then we sort of taught ourselves how to find books, and then had to kind of combine ideas to fit needs, and then talk to people. This is a book, and then it's like thinking about what can we, I think this is so this book down here is one where I wanted to turn this chess match into a book, because I thought it would be, it's like the idea of reading the match, like each page is 2 moves. I did a couple books like this with the woodcuts, and then so there's woodcuts that are printed on the paper, and then each of those pieces is this oil paint sort of stamp. So because it's signatures, it was this tricky thing of like, is that not gonna work? Where the
Maybe there's
should I stop?
too much,
these?
yeah, or wireless isn't.
Where so it's really easy to make a mistake with obviously just the chessboard itself, but then the pieces come off the board. And, This is a show we did at China Art Objects, the Scott Reader, which I guess maybe I could talk about this and then talk about the interest I've had in diptychs for a long time. I really like this show, like now thinking about this show as a diptych that keeps doubling itself. So we went and looked at the space, and the basement was painted red at the time, and I don't know if Scott said something like, this looks like the place where the devil would play poker or something. And so we just got the idea of having it be this sort of idea of heaven and hell, and the painting on top floor is heaven and the bottom painting is hell. But these are really loose. This is what looks like a live feed of the bathroom and the upstairs that you see behind. I don't know if to the right here you can see there's someone selling poker chips there. and the live feed is there, but some of it's like pre-made fictional video, and then picture of the poker table. The poker table itself was an inlaid felt sort of abstract painting. But I guess what I liked is that his brother and my brother was selling chips at the time, and his brother was doing something in a costume, I can't remember. But I guess now what I really like about it was just this idea. You have that literal diptych, and then you have Owens reader, diptych, brothers. Reporting paintings that's coming. This is a show I did that I guess feel like this illustrates a lot of what I've thought about over the years, which is like where I use the site in some ways to inform or start making the paintings. I didn't visit the space, but I asked her to send me all these pictures of the space. There's a bay of windows opposite that large painting, and this pole. And I remember like the idea I was talking about before with the trying to kind of reinvest in something that is dead or like completely worn out through cliche. The idea of a sunset painting, and I sort of like thought of the idea of this light of sunset, which never would happen, coming through the window and sort of leaving the shadow onto the sunset painting. I also was started off with this in a sketchbook drawing where I wrote the word sunset in LA for some reason. And so then I thought of the whole show as like kind of a portrait of America, where you have dawn in New York City, noon in the Midwest, and sunset in LA. So this was, and they got incrementally bigger, and this is sort of a new. And then in the office, she had this really tiny office. And I just thought I wanted to make something that expanded the space of the office, which was something I tried to do previously in Berlin. So it fit like kind of the whole space of the wall there. And then within that, like this is raw canvas, and that's raw canvas. Oh, that's funny, I didn't think of a blank canvas. That's really weird. Okay. Anyway, how much more time is it? Do you want, should I go back chronologically, or? I guess I can show you one of these larger shows at the installation of the studies, which I thought might be interesting. These are all studies on the wall.
Can you show us the Mooka exhibition?
Maybe. Yeah.
Or the one in Scotland.
Oh yeah. That is good. Yeah, so I was invited, this one, I guess, like I went to visit the site, and I saw that I was going to be showing the work in this botanical gardens, and I was just like, how do you, and all these windows, bays of windows, and I was like, how do you compete with this? And so I did this thing where basically most of the rooms are empty, and there's just these two paintings that are kind of communicating, and it's like the sun and the moon communicating through this hallway. At the time, I think I was thinking a lot about like conflating a lot of interests that I had into one painting, like making it all work within one painting. Obviously interested in like Japanese landscape painting, but also graphic design, like some of the background. I think I was looking at like the way that waves happen on that Pepsi can. And then again, like definitely like thinking about just sort of this literalization of the space. Of the stained part of the canvas is literally is back farther away from you than this sort of thicker paint that is the foreground. Another kind of literalization is that that was interesting was just like this the scale of this painting. What's nice is when you paint something small, it really is small. It's not like you're depicting a picture of small. So to me that was really funny and interesting.
Laura, I'm curious, you talked a bit about how the sites where you exhibit just put a certain pressure, can provide a sort of ground for the type of work you make for them.
Right.
I'm interested also in the question of time, temporality, because at least with the Bond show, it feels like the book has a certain time to it, a duration and a logic of speed, and the clocks as well. So I'm curious, like, is time also a consideration in how you're working or what you're working through? And then, like, what do you think the time of the painting is relative to the clock or the book?
I think a long time ago I was really interested in like allowing this kind of, knowing that within different contexts a painting kind of rises and falls, and that you have to let that happen and let it be interesting. So like for instance the one that I just showed you that has like kind of the imprint of the shadow of the pole, it's like this anecdote of the pole. I think now does that, once the time passes and the painting leaves that site, is that an imprint of memory, or is that part of the painting, or is it an anecdote? And like, can that function as part of the painting? Is it necessary or not? I was just wanting to see what happens. So I feel like there are some things like that. I feel like also another thing I still am interested in is just this idea of walking up to a painting, probably from being much younger and visiting museums and, you know, in these sort of classic Midwest sort of museums, you have these, like at the Art Institute and Cleveland Museum where I would go a lot, was you have these vistas where you see something and you're walking through. I think you kind of do it with the Met sometimes, but not so much with painting, where you're walking through rooms to get to something, so that something that is postage stamp suddenly becomes, you know, a 30-foot Mallard painting that you're standing before. That kind of duration, and then what it says about what painting can do, which is like, it can act as a postcard, it can telegraph itself across the museum in this way. And then it can also talk about marginality and things that are happening within the painting that's only something you could see close up. These are like really basic things, but I feel like there is like a lot of, that's what painting does. Like you get this to have this experience of approaching it. And then I can show you this other show I did where it was like, I was really interested in how you would be seeing peripherally the paintings while you're looking at the one. And that you would be getting these references of your periphery into the one. So, I mean, that's not like that's a time in a really spatial way, I guess. So, is that?
Yeah, can you show us those?
Yeah. Just let me say, like, after I did that portrait of America, I came back and I was supposed to do a show, and I decided now I really wanted to do this portrait of America by actually experiencing it and doing 3 shows at once. So I did a show in LA, a show in Chicago, and a show in New York. And I took the train across country. In a couple of the situations, I made it so there was this system of inherent possible or total failure, because I had to make the painting within this space of time of the gallery. So this was the LA show. And so this, I don't know if you can tell, that's like that slide's work, but this painting you can't see, but it mirrors this window that was there. It's the same scale. But this painting, which I guess I don't have a very good installation shot, is I made it within the gallery because it's the height of the gallery, and it was definitely the largest painting in the show, and it uses the house paint, the wall covering paint of the gallery to sort of camouflage itself within the show. So it was like this thing, this was the smallest painting in the show, it was sort of like the most active. It was taken from, at the time I was going to Descanso Gardens and Huntington Gardens, taking lots of pictures. It was taken from just a photograph I'd taken at the Descanso Gardens. So it was just this idea. This was a diptych. So that's that show. Then the Chicago show, like I took the train and I had visited that site before, but I basically, these are the only installation shots I have. So. What you don't see is that there's a 50-foot or 80-foot window perpendicular to this like very long skinny gallery. So what I did was take the horizon line of Lake Michigan into the painting. But that was made on site and presented lots of issues with just like actually like physically lifting it up and being able to.
How much time did you have to make?
Maybe like a week. But it was like that thing, I don't know, you'll all start to experience it now. There'll be some really young, awesome curator who on the phone is like, come to Chicago, yeah, you have a place for you to stay, and you're gonna do the show, and you get there and they're like, yeah, we're staying in my kid's bedroom, and you needed us to make a what? Like an 80-foot, oh yeah, I have these pallets I can put together. I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? It was like this crazy, like, so everything, as much as I had implanted this total chance for failure, it just like zoomed straight towards that situation. And because he didn't really construct a stretcher, it was like these, what, in the film industry, they just use those, they weigh like a ton. So it was like, I don't know, 8 or 10 of those just screwed together. Anytime I wanted to I had this way of working on the floor and then flipping it up and like that postage stamp thing, running back, looking at it, putting it back on the floor, working. I could only do that like twice. We had to get like 12 people to lift the painting up anytime I wanted to move it. But that's, and let's see, so the final one is the show, which this one has the funny anecdote, which is just that in all the spaces there's like one, like this, you can see this space, this painting here is meant to fit, you can't really tell, but I asked the person I work with in New York, very bad attention span problem. I asked him, I said, what's the size of the wall? I'm making a painting that fits on the wall. What's the size of the wall? How do you get that wrong? I don't know. But I then, once I hung it and it's hanging below the reveal and above the top of the thing, I was like, this is great. It's like a total portrait of our relationship. The fact that it will not meet, will not be perfect, So it's like totally, in the end, great. So, like, this is a really good illustration of a painting I made that was all about this not being able to start. I had this computer, it was right when, you probably don't know about, there's like this kids paint program, early like painting programs for computer where you just like, you're just doing, I had worked in one of those and had printed it out and it was hanging in my studio forever and it was like the show's about to happen, I have to ship the work out and my mom just comes in and she's like, what about this? Why don't you just make this painting? And I was like, what time is it? Yeah, okay, I'm making that. And it totally led to all these things. It's like I had to translate a computer program into paint for the first time. It led to this whole idea that I've been thinking about for a long time, which is this idea of collage without pentimento, which I think is like a product of the computer, that you can now have this sort of perfectly lateral collage with no buildup. So I was like, oh yeah, painting collage, no buildup. Interesting. So it totally influenced me in a way that a lot of it did. But between the paintings one show, I think that what I was talking about is here. So that a lot of the paintings, I only have that one installation shot. So this painting I made again from, there were no images and it was like I went to Mexico and took a picture of the beach and it was just a kind of a memory of the beach, but then just this funny idea of obvious. The bottom what you can't really tell is the bottom steps out with modeling paste a little bit. And these black shiny marks are thicker paint. So, but within this painting, I was dating someone at the time who made lamps, and I thought of this as like a portrait of him. But within this mirror, within the painting, is a reflection of that painting. And then you walked into another room, and this painting was by itself. And this again, so I was thinking about your periphery, but then this one I was thinking about the sort of bifocalness of painting your face and eyes and looking, and perspective being, pulling apart the two sides, and that there's a reference then to that painting that's hanging in the other room.
Can you show that members painting in the Mocha show, where the two members?
Okay. Let me see how it goes there. I don't think I have a picture over there.
You have the balls of
Yeah,
It's like in a little room by itself.
yeah, no, I didn't take a picture, so.
I saw it.
But you have the balls
I think it was when it was reinstalled somewhere else, maybe I have it.
Is that one famous? Like, seems like everyone knows it.
Oh, it was up at the beginning of the lecture.
Yeah. Here's, you can see
Oh, that's
when I-
it.
Yeah, and then this is like it's a pretty big room. Wait, here's the other thing. Yeah, there's a lot of diptychs I realized. I think I'm assuming both the thing I said about the studies and my interest in diptychs and sort of is why I'm now doing these sort of multiple panel things, but also maybe the time space thing. But I was really interested in this as a sort of continuation of the idea that how does painting become sculpture, and that space you're walking between these numbers is actually an activated space that's part of the piece. And so your body enters into this relationship with the paintings because you're in this reflection.
Could you talk about how these sort of like fun figurative elements come in, like the monkey and the horse? Like at what point they kind of enter in?
Yeah, I think what happened is I had this experience at the Art Institute of Chicago where I was teaching, and I went down to the basement of the textile. They have the textiles in the basement, not literally the basement, it's part of the museum, but it's the department. And they had 50 years of textile painting after the Bauhaus, which I guess, I don't know if you know, like after the war, a lot of those people and then their students end up in Chicago teaching design and textile. And so there's this history like Ben Rose and different people. And so what they had was just yardage from maybe the 40s, 50s, 60s. But what they did is to show you the yardage was make these strainers that are 3 feet wide, like yardage, and 11 feet tall, and stretch the yardage on there. And I guess what I liked was this, like the thing I was saying with clock painting, it's like that you can decide to just join them and say, this is a painting too, this is a painting, and it's not like I'm making an art historical argument, it's more like for my own personal idea of like, okay, I was handed this sort of idea of what painting is from this particular canon of art history, and when I get to add on to it and decide in my own frame, okay, now these are all paintings, it's like this incredibly freeing thing. So I think then, after that, I then went to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and lived there at the museum for a month. And they do have a basement with its full textile collection that's just preserved. and because I knew I was sort of interested, I asked him to open these boxes and look in there, and I met these conservators, and they're like, you gotta go to Europe to the Abbey Stiftung, to the Victorian Albert. So I did this sort of tour of, kind of diving into textiles. And so I think like a lot of this imagery, like this badger comes off of a kimono from Mrs. Gardner's collection of kimonos. I think this stuff comes from something I was looking at the time. But the other thing is like these, because I was interested in this problem with I had this problem with getting started, and then I also was interested in like using the space of the where the paintings, using the site or the wall itself to be part of the painting. So this painting got made because, and that's probably how I got into animal paintings in general, was I was sitting on my couch, my friend Scott Reeder was there, and it was just like the time is ticking away and I'm trying to get started, not really happy with anything I'm doing in the studio, and every time I want to take a break, I go and I sit down and I open this book of, I think it was from a Met, like Chinese painting, 10th, 11th century Chinese painting, and I kept looking at this painting, and it was literally like falling in love or something. It was like this, like, I was just crushed out on this painting so much that I was like, who can make a painting? This is the best painting. It's in Taiwan. I'll never see it. I'm talking to Scott, and he's like, dude, just, like, get up and make a painting. I'm like, but it was this recognition, like, okay, the world's not going to fall apart if I remake and take this painting that will never be seen in the United States. And obviously it doesn't look anything like the Gibbon master who painted it. But it's just sort of like this permission to sort of like allow that entry into, and to not have this sort of any kind of hesitation about like where my interest lies or what's interesting to me, and just sort of like completely go full throttle with it and realize that it's more than just like my desire to recreate this particular art historical phenomena that happened in the 11th century. It's there's something else about it, which ends up being the fact that that these faces have some kind of that there's some, with the way I painted the studies for this like maybe 40 times, because it's really important that those two eyes, when they look, that they actually communicate. If you have an expanse of 30 feet, that they actually communicate to one another, and that there's a formal device happening through this sort of empathy of the eyes. And it was really easy with literally like a set millimeter of charcoal to make the grin of the monkey into sort of a menacing thing, or to make it be this thing that is like, sort of borderline between. Anyway.
The way that you use the dimensions of the wall really reminds me of Galen Gerber, but he completely has it. But I don't know, did you study with Galen too?
I kind of think of myself as studying with Galen only because I was teaching when he was teaching, and I felt like he was the cool guy in high school. So I would like go and listen to him and whatever. He has a way of disseminating information at all points in time. So yeah, definitely. He was doing shows, Dan Hoog and this guy Michael in Chicago, or had the space. He was doing shows there with Rebecca Morris and Mara Eastman. Yeah. But also, yeah, there's a lot of people who
A lot of people don't do size of the wall unless they're like painting on the wall. That's what I know at least.
But his is more like it also has a sort of social element of being like a gesture that's like, something to put things in front of, or like just go behind. I don't know. I think I'm definitely like leaning more towards like a sort of formal interest that comes out of you know, just really simple ideas that came from minimalism and sculpture. This is another funny kind of idea of diptych where I made this painting, which is a small painting, and then I wanted to hang opposite these monkeys, and this is another one that kind of came off if you're looking at the computer, but then I remembered about the office space and wanting to make another painting that fit within the office, so I sort of like reverse engineered the small painting which I had made, even though I made it first, is the detail of this larger painting. So I don't know how you would say that, but it's like the detail is within here, but this is made after the fact.
Nice.
Zoom out.
So I guess that's kind of funny to me. Like, it's funny enough to like do it. So.
Well, I'm curious, like, the way that it's like the works managed to be reflexive in a way that points to their context, like the context of exhibition, without seeming to be asked to be taken within the rubric of institutional critique. But, like, I'm curious about, like, for you, like, what's being pointed to, because it's more than just like the sculptural facet of the painting or the reality of the space in which the painting is exhibited.
When I point to that, when I use that kind of self-reflexivity, what's being pointed at? I mean, I feel like that's sort of a situation we're in. I mean, there's just like, when you're making paintings now, you're kind of soaked in self-reflexivity. You can't, and some, I guess just to dive right at it instead of like saying, oh yeah, I have to, ignore it, or, hopefully it's not like totally about that, but I feel like it's like there, just like one of the things going on, but.
I think like that word you use, empathy, is a good one, because it's like, if that condition is a reality, I don't feel like it's like an end game in how you're working, it's not like, it doesn't make the painting like a byproduct of like the instrumentalization of a reflexive gesture,
Right.
Like it does feel like something's communicated, like you're welcome into the space of consideration, like as a viewer.
Yeah, and I'm really invested in having a studio practice, and I think that like that studio practice, in order to not be an anachronistic, is that a word? Anachronistic, which you can't, I literally think you can't, it would be like you, and I think, the younger you are, probably the more, you don't even need to talk about this, because it's just going to be there, you know what I mean? But I think for me, when I was in school, and where I went to school, at least on the East Coast, there's a real investment in holding on to something that's extremely romantic that I actually think is like I'm interested in all. I think that romantic vision of the art, of who the artist is really important. Like I think no 16-year-old in the world would want to be an artist if we get rid of that. So we will just end, we'll just all be something else. But I think it's a part, but I think, because they're worried about, threatened by someone like Andy Warhol, like they're like grasping at, alizarin crimson, paint. So that's like I want to have it all. So I want to have, and I think that you do. It's just there, in the studio. But I don't think I'm like a post-studio art. You know what I mean? Like I'm not that person. I am. I do have a studio practice that's pretty traditional, and am interested in like with a lot of formal concerns, and that's how I know how to finish a painting. Like I love finishing paintings because I feel like there is like this sort of formal, like that idea that I'm looking at the blank canvas going, Mark, illustrative, no, like that's fun. That's like the part I want to get to, where you like are thinking about it and you're doing it. But I think in order to like kind of go with and have that studio practice, you have to set up a certain amount of I guess I would think of it as like kind of humility, like it's like this like thing where you know what you're trying to enact, but it also could just be like historically like that. I'm kind of pretty much convinced women can't inhabit cannot be the mark maker. Like we don't think we have access to it in some way. Like that my gesture will never be that. So it's like, okay, where am I then? If I don't have access to that gesture, if I can't be the author of it.
I wanted to ask about, kind of like when you came of prominence or of age, like what kind of the scene was at the time, if it was more like conceptually oriented, more like object oriented. And because I see your work as kind of like an extension of like this afterglow of conceptual, and the same thing with Scott Reeder, like it's, you kind of got to know this stuff to really get it, and how it's funny or how it works within the historical context. But I was thinking of your paintings as being very specifically like these things that you can actually, they're not about the idea or the image of an idea, they're actually about the thing. And I think, I don't know, I feel like conceptual art is kind of like this underlining of like post-capitalist societies that do value image over object. And the demystification of the object is really just like an underlining of the capitalist modes of production where you're more spectacle oriented. And that kind of like the artist that, like Pollock to me is more of a liberal.
Life and art are integrated. It's like painting practice with no excuses. It's like it was just like this amazing moment, which, I don't know.
I mean, she wasn't even having like a big moment yet. I mean, that was like before.
No, but that's the thing. There were so few models. Like at RISD, I was pretty good friends with Deb Cass. I don't know if you know her. She's another sort of feminist painter. But it was just like she at least was a model for like how you keep. I think we were like probably like I knew about Mary Howland at RISD when I was younger, but only because she was one of a handful of relatively well-known abstract female painters, but David Reed had been there the semester before, and he was good friends with her, and he was like, yes, you really should have Mary. So I think probably he was like, yeah, I'll get her out here. And plus she has this whole affinity for the West Coast, and that was another thing that no one remembers. It's kind of weird, like it's mutated now, but there was like a huge prejudice against people painting in LA and showing in New York. It was like, you were like not, it was like you had to be there, you had to be making paintings there or something. Not literally, but it was like just like, it just didn't compute like that you'd be like painting in Los Angeles. But because she'd been from here, she didn't have any of that, weird baggage of what it meant, and it's really weird, awful, like stereotypical, like, oh, you're painting the light of California. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? No, I'm not painting the light of California. Like, where does that come from?
Are you satisfied? How do you feel about the writings about your work, including like what 99% of it is incredibly positive? Do you think it? I wonder, only because I know you a little bit, and you talk about stepping back from. I mean, you don't seem to be like trying to establish the ground rules for how your work is going to be talked about ever.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's ever resulted in weird relationships.
Painful. Yeah. It's painful. I mean, there's painful conversations you have with people who interview who are like, just completely missing it. But there's just like only so much, like you have this much amount of energy, and I was like, I just decided if I'm going to try to control or influence that's going to take this energy and put it over here. Tom Lawson also like at CalArts was like, because I was trying to write myself, and he's like, just paint. He's like, I did the writing thing and the painting thing, just paint. He's like, I'm telling you.
I mean, yeah, you had Tom, you had Laney, you had these sort of champions. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that they got it like 80% right or something.
Yeah,
from your
Tom wrote
perspective.
something that was really great.
Yeah.
And,
But but I mean, I can imagine that Lane has his own agenda, and that, it's pretty easy to put onto your work, but it probably only gets part of it.
Lane's agenda is so vast, I can't even make it my.
Well, yeah, I'm a CalArts, I'm a painter. I decided to
Oh,
come
yeah.
down and represent. And Tom tells me the same thing, just paint, and
Yeah.
worry about all this talk and explaining. And Leslie Dick told me that, I don't know if I'm representing this accurately, but she said one thing that you learned there was to not talk about, a lot of people learn how to talk about their work. That's what you're at school for, articulate what you're supposed to say. Charles Gaines keeps saying, what are you saying, what are you saying? And we have awkward silences in the studio, like you said, like just no vocabulary for
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about abstraction, color, space, all that, no vocabulary, So,
Charles is my mentor. I vividly remember him sitting me down in his office, and I was like, I wasn't intimidated by him. I mean, I know he's like super brilliant, but I was like sitting there. Now that I look back, I should have been totally intimidated. He was like, okay, you need to decide, are you an expressionist or not? And I was like, and he was dead serious, and I was like right now. He was like, you want an answer? It was like, I was like, whoa.
yeah.
So it was kind of like that, like you're with these questions, it's not like I didn't want to talk, it was just like, that's like a lifetime, like, well, how am I supposed to answer that like in our 40-minute meeting, like?
Yeah, I mean, so you did, I work with Tom mostly because I don't find too many people who, people still like the paintings, that's the other thing. I mean, there's this other community of like the whole school at large, oh, I like your paintings, but not in the art school. It might be like the dance or the theater. They enjoy looking at them. Felt that like there was a larger
There's
picture.
like, I don't know why, I think there's a kind of a little, I think I was trying to describe, there could be just like this little anti-intellectual tinge that's associated with painting. But, so it's like you don't want to get near the smell, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want that stank on you, like, so you step away from it. So that's probably, but I feel like that, it could be, I doubt it, not like, I don't know, I have no idea. Did we fill up the 2
I
hours?
was thinking about narrative.
Narrative?
Is narrative in these awards? Or is it always been in there? Or is it not there? It's just time. That's different than narrative. It is kind of different.
I guess when I hear the word narrative, I think it's really easy to slip into language, like as a allegory or there's like literal narratives, like the way the painting got made, like, oh, you can tell that this was made first and then that. Then there's like when you separate out the parts, that a lot of times with the paintings, there's like 6 different ways the paint's being applied. That's a little bit like schizophrenic. There's a narrative that, like, how is it left up to combine? I mean, but I don't know, is there a narrative in painting that you find?
I don't know.
Like, I just heard this, I just was thinking about, what was it, I think it was Clemente talking about narrative, and I think he really means narrative. Like, I don't think he means like a meta.
I would mean it with a really small hand.
Uh-huh.
When you were showing the work that you made this year at the beginning, I was thinking, this is like more narrative. It's very small hand. And I think of her work. And then when you showed like the 2 monkeys across the room, and you talk about there's this little thin stroke I can make, and where they're either angry at each other or they are friendly with each other. You know, there's these decisions made that are like, one could argue if you really were invested in it, like there was kind of narrative.
I think it's, well, but that in specifically is trying to avoid.
That's true.
Yeah. I think with some of those, like the beehive paintings, the monkeys, that I really was thinking like these are abstract paintings. Like you can't, this is not about a beehive. I'm not like talking about how bees make honey. You know, if anything, it's about, where it's coming from, and like, is a pillow that you find at a yard sale with crewel work, can that be a painting? Like, can that, and like with the monkeys, I mean, the way I'm using it with this circulation through the wall, it's really, I kind of feel like that's, to me, that's abstract. You don't think about, I don't really feel like, oh, these monkeys, like, I don't go there. I'm sure there's some people maybe do, but I don't.
I don't really. I just wonder.
very studio sort of process question about the relationship between the studies and the pieces, and how if there's ever sort of surprises in that process of going from the study to the painting and how you make decisions, and how much you allow yourself to sort of.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways that I work in terms of like the actual process. Like some of them are really pretty planned out, to I would say about 80% of the way it's going to look, but that study making thing is part of that planning. So the studies are trying out the materials or the scale. Like a lot of times I go back and forth through the computer a lot. Like I'll make a drawing on the wall that's to scale, take a picture of it, put it in the computer, use Photoshop, erase in Photoshop, reproject, redraw, so that I'm working on the right scale. Then I'll put it back in the computer, add like layers of collage onto the computer image, reproject that, and go, okay, now I'm ready to order the structure. Like I'm pretty sure this is where I'm going. And then I'll get like the materials and start working on, so it's like a really, there's a lot of editing, and I guess what should probably be traditionally like this pentamente build-up is a lot of practicing and things going on that don't end up on the actual end canvas. And sometimes there's been studies that are literally the same size as the canvas. It's just like a way of like rehearsing, making the painting, because it's like sometimes I'm teaching myself some technique that I've never really done before, or using some weird house paint or something.
And is that sort of are you saying something by sort of hiding that process? I mean, I think like traditionally painting is sort of transparent in revealing that process, and I think I find it interesting that yours.
No, I'm not trying to say anything. I think that I do want there to be this sort of effortless simplicity to some of the work that I'm talking about. So, and getting the image to read at 50 feet away in some ways requires you to not just start painting on the canvas and hoping it works out. I mean, that just would be pretty rare. So, yeah, I mean, I think you could say like, how there's like, calligraphic painting, or that's like a kind of one-shot situation. Sometimes it's like that. It's not that was the first time they made that mark, but that's like they had to just do it, So.
Are there paintings that are made for a specific installation? Like, for example, the one with that has the shadow of the pole at Sadie Q's. How do you, like, what's your relationship to them, or how do you think about them, like, once they leave the space they were intended for? Like, do you go visit them in a different space? And
Yeah, they've been shown.
Remember the time that was installed, like, the right way, or like, not,
Yeah, I guess I made it with you knowing that would kind of be this kind of problematic that follows the painting, or does not, whether or not you know this sort of anecdote. I guess I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Just like when I made that one seagull painting, I wasn't thinking of Van Gogh's crows, but I was like, oh, I love this painting, but put it next to Van Gogh's crows and it's going to be like nothing. It's going to fall off the wall and be nothing. It's like, but it's like, so it's like the context can deflate or inflate the situation. And I don't know, they don't do it very much anymore, but like 10 years ago, there used to be these theme shows, really thematic, like, I don't know, flower show, and I think those shows really kill art in a lot of ways sometimes, where you're taking one really, one idea that doesn't really have anything to do with any of the artist's work, and try to see it in all these things, and then pull it out into a new context that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with where any one person's coming from with those.
I was thinking about what you said about beginning by thinking about what the most difficult painting would be that you've made.
Yeah.
I guess, well, to what extent is that a personal question, and to what extent is that in consideration of what's happening in broader painting discourse? And then a second part of that question is, at the moment, what is the most difficult painting that you could make?
I think it actually like kind of comes out of a situation of how I decided to be an artist, which was I was pretty good at math and had like a regular college thing ready to go like around 14, 15 and just dropped, you know, like I took the AP class but then I dropped out of like just like 6 art classes and everyone was really mad and like, why aren't you taking computer and why aren't you, I'm like, I'm going to art school. And it was sort of because it was like this idea that I figured I wanted to have I mean, and this is really like juvenile thinking at the time, but I wanted to have do something that didn't have an answer. Like there was no end. And I saw it with all these other kind of career paths, it's like there's an end. You like are going to this and it stops, and there's an answer. So I think that the way I'm working, which is like never really kind of solvable or something, is sort of matches up with that original intention of what I thought art should be. This thing that keeps going with it. I don't know what the hardest painting to make would probably be something that had to do with Picasso, but didn't fall into every single fucking cliche about Picasso. That sounds really hard.
I look forward to seeing it next year.
Hey, Laura, can you talk about collaboration in the books? Because you just touched on it. But...
Yeah, I had this whole other project because I taught myself to make these books where it's sort of my own desire to like I've always done like mini collaborations or projects with other artists, so I'm using this skill, and Edgar is also doing it with me, where we are inviting other artists to, or writers or whoever, to come and think about making a book, and we're sort of facilitating them making something, and each thing can be unique, but we're hoping to make at least 2 things with each artist so that they get one and we get one. And it's been really great because some of the artists we've done that with, it's totally influenced their work just to like any collaboration does, but like Mary Weatherford, we did something with her, and like totally the way her paintings got made changed because the way she used this particular ink on the particular paper, it's just like she tried to kind of go in the direction of her painting, so it was really great. So it's like this sort of a generative thing that comes out of wanting to not have an isolated studio practice, wanting to own other people's art, and wanting to also kind of just get other people interested in something that's sort of like, why would you ever want to do that? Like, okay, here. But we get the paper and we bind the book, and if they have some hard problem, like how do I make a ceramic book or something, we try to do a little R&D as much as we can.
Who are some other artists that you
We've asked a ton of people. It's really funny to be on the other side of this. Like, you're like, oh my God, these fucking artists are so difficult. You're like, you can't really do, like, it's just like, Soka, we're trying to get her to do something. My friend Eric Palgon did a book. David Corney did a couple books. Roger we're doing some books with Roger. Roger, Roger, here's the paper. I don't know if you guys know Roger. He's like, got so much energy. It was like, we dropped off this paper, came back to his studio like maybe 4 weeks later. His studio has like 20-foot ceilings. He went and bought like probably this much more paper. Like ceiling to floor, paper. I'm like, oh my God, this is like 50 books. I don't know what. I was like, we're just gonna start with 2, okay? It was like, but it was amazing to see how just like introducing like a new material was just like, he made like all these wood cuts, and it's just like going, it's crazy. I was like, this is amazing to just watch how.
How big are the editions?
They're unique, but we try to have them make 2 objects so that everybody walks away with something and is happy. And I'm hoping, I feel like at first I was like, oh, in like 3 years I'll have like 20 books. Like we have like 3 or 4, like the artists, but finished. Yeah, now I'm thinking it's like a 10-year project for sure. Because I want to have like a library, like just some library of like this moment and who we were working with and our relationship, in LA. And who else did we invite? I'm trying to think of. Monique. Caitlin. Katie Fisher.
remarking on Tyler's question, he made reference to the contemporary painting discourse, and I'm wondering, how does that translate to you? What does that mean? Who do you think about? Who do you read about painting? Or, when you hear contemporary painting discourse, what does that mean?
There's things you just have to read that are irritating. All of it's a little bit irritating.
Right now, yeah.
Who's the least irritating?
The least I just know.
Who's the most?
That's probably
This is all really.
I like to refer to provisional pages
I mean, I feel like you have to read the David Giles. I mean, it's sort of factually maybe accurate. I don't know, but it's not something that I get like all excited about. I'm like, oh yeah, you did it. Really said what it is. And I don't know. I think. I've read some stuff where people like really think about one artist's work, and they're really thinking about like going deep into a couple paintings by an artist. Like, usually that stuff I feel like is the best because you have to grapple with the details, and but I don't know any one thing's coming to mind. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's sort of a loaded question in the sense, or loaded, backloaded, I don't know, in the sense that if you think back to this show that we did together with Sharon, the one, like, how do you guys interact? They were like trying to make a show that would talk about how we influence each other, even though we weren't doing the same thing. And now I'm kind of thinking, just hearing you talk about the process and having known you for a while and seeing the work and thinking about other painters, and that there's this kind of unwritten, unspoken thing that is so complicated, that is a kind of painting discourse that is not written, that is so practice-based. I think because I was showing some Peter Doig paintings to a student the other day, or I was kind of somehow like going from Peter to Lucy to your paintings, and just thinking about the way like super studio practice-based artists really influence each other so much, but it's not in any kind of discursive way. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe now that you say that, I feel like I do read a lot of interviews with artists and like stuff Lucy's written, and like when people sometimes do catalogs and friends interview each other, and I feel like those are the ones where I'm like, oh yeah, that's like not so much where someone's trying to rise above it and look and sort of see what the landscape is. Like that's just sort of like you have to read it, but it's not like I feel like somebody just did that and I'm like, here we got it. I telegraphed,
I mean, maybe also because on some level too, we were talking about this earlier before your talk, that the market sort of precludes a certain, I mean, I can't remember, I think Cornelia Grassi was saying something about like John Curran, like no one can write anything about him or something because the market is just sort of overwhelmed.
Yeah, Roberta Smith has said that about Matthew Barney, I think the Big Show at the Guggenheim, and John Curran. I feel like she said something to the effect that was really like snide and, like there's nothing I can write here that will make any difference whatsoever. It was like that. It kind of.
But is that the intention of the critic, to devalue all this work? Like to interject some sort of criticality? Because it is true, like at a certain point you
I think
can't
she's
just
just trying to
wall,
say that
everyone still
meaning
wants
has
to
been
buy it.
set. The meaning's got this like, there's not, it has a certain like large, it's tapped itself in and staked itself down in so many ways. It's not, we can't kind of get around it. I don't know. Like, I think, I'm thinking about, I feel like I'm thinking about the Matthew Barney show. I'm thinking of him, I can't remember. It was kind of like, I don't know, it was like she was totally relating it to MTV and like, like how do you critique this thing that's already in the culture and sort of a thing of itself, which, and maybe a mini level John Curtis.
This could be a terrible and unanswerable question on that track, but why do you think, like, do you have an opinion on why people want to, like, announce, like, things like the death of painting or, like, make a pronouncement
something where you want to say that it's like an ambivalence or something, you know, like an inherent ambivalence. And there's sort of a, like even when you look at, I mean, there's a sort of primacy that painting had historically that still, like that work is still out there, it still exists, you know, we all go see it at certain museums, and that it has this gravitas to it that nobody wants to believe just sort of evaporated. Well, probably didn't, you know, but there's like the you know, and some people probably look at all of this stuff as painting, all of the video, everything is painting, you know what I mean? But like, I think it's just like, you know, it could be that kind of clench into the past that's like a, how did we let go of this, you know, or it could be I don't know, a sort of rebellious, sort of like, I don't need the past, like pushing it away, I don't know.
Yeah, Morgan Fisher is sort of a funny example in that respect, because when you hear him speaking about, you know, his decisions and what kind of paintings he's going to make, he's so kind of worshipful of that avant-garde trajectory or whatever, that art, and you're kind of sitting there going, okay, this is like an amazing structuralist filmmaker who's so brilliant, who's like, it's kind of hard to believe that he would be so respectful of this, like, I am not allowed to do this in painting. This is not allowed in painting. This is not allowed in painting. You know, but somehow, because I think about that a lot, about your sort of open attitude, this kind of like the big picture and sort of counterbalances and stuff, and how, and he's an artist I think is super, super interesting, but he, like a lot of people from his generation who come and speak, they almost always say this thing like, no, can't do that, I couldn't do that, and you couldn't do that. Like they were all obeying these rules, you know, so strictly. And I'm not really sure what I'm saying, is that he's kind of a funny example of someone who does that, but somehow is doing something completely different while still trying to obey it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
At the same time, there's something about Morgan Fisher where you don't believe that he would want to say nobody could make a painting like that. He did manage in his talk at least to make it feel very personal.
Right.
He'd been searching his whole life for a way to make paintings, and he finally found it. And it was only through this structure that he felt comfortable making paintings. But like, I guess my question was just more about like the desire, like even through making paintings, like there are people right now who have painting practices that are so tautological and self-productive in this way that says other kinds of paintings can't exist.
Right.
Somehow, in the way that like they're trying to assert like that maybe no painting is possible at all, and if any painting is possible, this maybe would be the only one, which feels very different from how Morgan ends up.
You mean like Cheney or something?
I'm remaining nameless.
How?
Well, sometimes this is also like an art like a problem where if you have too many options, you can't move. So it's like a process problem. Like you do have to sometimes lay the hammer down and be like, I am from here to here, so that you can find the depth there. Otherwise, you're just.
I think that's the situation more than anything. Is like when you get in this purely pluralistic kind of open-ended position, no one has a stake in anything. But if someone says fuck painting, and you have this camp that says fuck painting, and then you have a camp that says no, don't fuck painting, and you actually create opinions, and you get back on this like modernist train. Whereas like when you're kind of in the critical stage of like, because I think postmodernism is just like this like side chat, like a huddle, like whoa guys, we really screwed it up here with the Holocaust or whatever. And whereas like, so when you don't have, when you
once
don't.
the Holocaust is mentioned, you kind of the lectures right? Was that Nazi?
There's a law. It's called a law. There's some law that's like.
The expressive question that Charles put to you.
Yeah.
That's one of those bounds that we're a lot more open than. I do think that Morgan's generation, keep going with this, it was so close to that revolt against annex and everything they represented, which was.
But it could just really actually be, I mean, I don't know, I haven't heard him talk about that, but it could also be like a personal decision that that's where he starts, you know? But there's so much to go in that direction that you have to start somewhere, so.
And he's definitely a structural, a starter and finisher, sort of, or a starter and stay on that path for a long, long time, kind of
You
artists.
can't deny artists their temperaments, you know? Some people just dogma fits them well.
I made a mistake by mentioning the word opposite. What I want to say is like that in today's world where we're a little more open, or some people a lot more open, still that expressive line is a really tough one as any kind of artist, but especially maybe as a painter because of its history. I mean, do you feel that? Or do you feel like the artists of your generation or younger or really are a lot more comfortable with that term?
Do you see like expressionism like just synonymous?
No, just you're there and so you're around young painters, that's all I'm saying. Or is it still kind of one of those few forbidden territories?
I certainly don't have that problem, but I mean, I feel like I'm interested in uncovering where my embarrassment or where I'm afraid to go. So if I was afraid, like at some point I was painting animals and I was like, oh my God, I'm not painting a figure. And I forced myself to paint the figure as embarrassing as it was going to be, just because it was like not there. So like I'm more interested in doing that, like, sort of seeing how I can get underneath where my intention wants to take me, or some sort of comfort thing. I think there's a way to do everything. I just think it's like how you do it, you know? So it's like in the naming of it, like you name it expressionism, but no one could make an expressionistic painting now, I don't think. I mean, it's like that and 60 other things, you know, it's not just that. I mean, is like Amy Silman an expressionistic painter? I mean, no, she's so much more than just, you can't just say. I mean, I guess you could, I don't know, if you wanted to.
I think very few people do. That word doesn't tend to get used. The other things, all those other things.
I think what
tend to get
Charles
talked
meant
about,
was,
whereas-
are you going to rely on intuition and sort of a bodily response, or are you going to plan every single thing out and have a reason for doing it? And I feel like when you do both, I don't know, who cares? I don't know. Why is that a question? Like, why not? I guess it all comes down to, and this is something maybe a long time ago we realized once you're out of art school, is it's really fucking hard to make art. It's so hard that you can't like put up a bunch of roadblocks in the way and be like, I'm gonna make it harder now. You know, like you really have to make it. I mean, you'll have those anyway, so you need to like take down a few permissions, put some permission up to just fail. You know, and fail publicly.